Hi there, American Atheist. I just got through watching your diatribe against Buddhism, and I'll try and respond. First of all, as with your questions on anarchism in a previous video you did, it would behoove you to learn a little about these subjects before you rail against them. As in anarchism, the problem there was you didn't know enough to even formulate a coherent question that would be applicable. So, for instance, just to get to the point, one of your issues with reincarnation, as you understand it, not as the Buddha taught it, not as Buddhists around the world understand it, but as you understand it, there's a problem because there's more people now than there were in 1900. Newsflash for you. Buddhism has no belief in a soul. It is a non-theistic, atheistic religion that doesn't believe in a soul. So your question of where are all the new souls coming from is not applicable. It's called the anatta doctrine, the not self. Some Buddhists and some ignorant atheists may take that as a metaphysical doctrine, but it's not. It is a system or a therapeutic tool, if you will, to rid ourselves of false notions of self. We often think of ourselves as, I'm white, I'm a carpenter, I'm this, I'm that. We apply these false labels to ourselves, and then when those things are no longer true, it causes us suffering, correct? The anatta doctrine is not a metaphysical doctrine on self, that there isn't a soul, that there is a soul. When asked point blank if the soul exists, he refused to answer it. And he explained that to answer it either way would cause more suffering. I won't get into that, but the basic idea is your question of souls is not applicable. It's not a proper understanding of what is meant or understood by rebirth. Rebirth isn't me. In the Buddhist tradition, Buddhists don't believe that they as an individual are constantly reborn. We are composed of many elements. Even in a scientific way you could understand this. The energy that constitutes this being is constantly in flux. At death it doesn't cease to exist. It goes on based on karmic fruits. It's not me as I understand myself at this point. It's more like an energy. It's not... You seem to be confusing the Hindu idea of reincarnation with the Buddhist idea of rebirth, which was they're radically different. He borrowed many of the same terms, but within the Buddhist context, they took on much different meanings. I would suggest you go to a webpage, accesstoinsight.org. There you can have access to actual Buddhist teachings, the Pali Canon, which contain the oldest and most reliable source of the Buddhist teachings. You go into some other things. A lot of it's just based on ignorance. And I'm not saying it can't be a case made against Buddhism, but I think you'd have to be a little more educated or a little more well-read to make such a case. It should be stated right up front that the Buddha was very quick to point out to people to not believe what he said based on tradition, scripture, or because someone told you. But believe something, one, because you find it to be true, and two, because the wise concur with you. Okay? And what he actually says, don't go by reports, by legends, by traditions, by scripture, by logical conjecture, by inference, by analogies, by agreement, through pondering views, by probability, or by thought. This contemplative is our teacher. When we know for ourselves that these mental qualities are skillful, these mental qualities are blameless, these mental qualities are praised by the wise, these mental qualities were adopted, carried out, lead to the welfare and happiness, then you should enter and remain in them. So, Buddhism encourages skepticism. It's not a faith of dogma or blind faith. So that should be understood. No soul, no God, no blind faith. Your question as far as the abuse of Buddhist clergy, the extravagant temples. Unfortunately, religion has often been used as a class tool, used to oppress the masses. Again, I would point to the Buddha himself, where there was a tradition for hundreds of years. There were no statues of the Buddha. At most, you might have a cast of footprints, something to remember. As time went by, people wanted to build a statue to remember the guy, remember what he was about. Over time, that's, your temple, my temple, it's got to, how we got to outdo each other. No doubt, there's problems there. But you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because some Buddhists have taken it to the extreme or used Buddhism in nefarious ways. Also, I'd like to point out on the issue of karma you get into. Karma is never used to justify inequality. Okay? Never. To explain something is not the same thing as to justify it. If I explain your handicap by karma, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to do everything in my power to help you. I don't think any Buddhist on this planet thinks of karma as a justification for whatever bad befalls their neighbor. It's an understanding that there is a cause for why bad things happen. You can disagree with it, we can argue about it, but in the end, it doesn't justify anything. It doesn't justify any of the inequalities that we find on this planet. And as such, your arguments really don't stand up. Finally, you get into nirvana, which you clearly don't understand. I don't have the time to get into it right now, but suffice to say, the Buddha was very clear on what nirvana was: freedom from suffering, freedom from false views, total liberation of the self, and the ultimate happiness. Now, and it's not something that's completely unattainable, but it takes hard work and diligence. There's not some magical system, as in Christianity, some other faith, where you wish upon a magic person and poof, these good things happen. It takes work, it takes diligence, and it takes understanding, the cultivation of discernment, to discern what's true, what's not, what's good, what's not. And ultimately, as Buddhists, we're trying to develop skillful qualities. So I don't see what problem there is there. Again, I would encourage you to learn more about Buddhism, and when you're going to do a diatribe against a faith, go to the source. Don't just go to a web page. Go to the actual source. If you're going to badmouth Christianity, pull from the Bible. If you're going to badmouth Buddhism, go to the Pali Canon. Use what the Buddha actually taught rather than what some misguided follower may believe he taught. Again, thank you.